The alien excavation team moved carefully through the ruined battlefield, their scanners sweeping the lifeless landscape. The sky above was a dull shade of gray, thick with the ghosts of a war fought centuries ago. This planet had once been a battleground between the Galactic Dominion and the long-extinct humans. Now, it was just another dead world, one of many left behind after humanity's downfall. Commander Zeltor adjusted his visor, his reptilian eyes narrowing as his team closed in on a massive structure buried beneath layers of ash and debris. The scanners beeped rapidly, indicating an enormous metallic mass hidden beneath the surface. It had to be a war relic, possibly one of the last surviving artifacts of the human resistance. "Proceed with caution," he ordered, his voice cold and emotionless. The excavation drones activated, their mechanical arms digging away at the thick layers of dust and rock. As they worked, massive chunks of metal began to emerge. The ground trembled slightly as the towering shape of a long-lost warship was slowly revealed. It was old, very old, but somehow it still held a sense of terrifying power. The hull was scared and battered, yet the structure remained intact. One of the alien scientists, a thin, insect-like being named Vraxis, stepped forward, running a series of scans on the exposed ship. "Commander, the energy readings are unusual," he muttered, adjusting his scanner. "This thing should be completely dead, yet there are faint power signatures deep within the core." Zeltor scoffed. "Impossible. Human technology was primitive. If this ship has survived this long, it's nothing more than an empty shell, a relic of a dead race." The ship loomed before them, partially buried, like a predator waiting in the shadows. The aliens saw nothing but rust and decay, but something inside the ship disagreed. Deep within the massive structure, past the shattered corridors and silent control rooms, something stirred. A dim red light flickered. It was weak, barely more than a spark, but it pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a heartbeat. Zeltor signaled his team to move in closer. The aliens cautiously stepped onto the wreckage, their armored boots echoing against the metal. They had no fear. The war against humanity had ended centuries ago. The idea of humans still posing a threat was laughable. "Deploy cutting lasers," Zeltor commanded. "Let's open this thing up and see what secrets it holds." The drones obeyed, their beams slicing through the thick metal hull. The ship groaned in protest, as if it resented being disturbed after centuries of slumber. Inside, in the dark, the red light pulsed again. A whisper of static crackled through the ship's dead comm systems. Dust swirled in the corridors as something ancient and powerful reawakened. "Commander," Vraxis said suddenly, his voice tense. "The power readings, they're increasing." Zeltor frowned. "What?" A low, mechanical growl rumbled through the wreckage. The sound was deep, vibrating through the metal, almost like a warning. The aliens froze. They had dismissed the power signatures as nothing more than residual energy. But this was different. This was alive. Vraxis' scanner beeped frantically. "Something is booting up." Zeltor's grip tightened around his plasma rifle. "Cut the power. Now." Before they could react, the entire ship shuddered. A sudden surge of energy pulsed through its veins, like blood rushing back into a dormant beast. Emergency lights flickered to life, casting eerie red shadows through the corridors. The ship let out another deep guttural growl. A single word crackled through the static-filled speakers. "Operational." The aliens panicked. "Get out of there," Zeltor roared. The ground beneath them trembled as the ship's ancient systems roared back to life. Monitors flickered, long-dead circuits hummed with energy, and deep in the heart of the war machine, something massive and powerful took its first breath in centuries. The Titan's wrath was waking up. Beneath the ruined surface of the war-torn planet, deep inside a network of underground tunnels, the last remnants of humanity clung to survival. The world above was no longer theirs. It had been taken, burned, and abandoned by the very species that once ruled the stars. Now they lived in the shadows, scavenging, hiding, and praying that the galaxy had forgotten them. Jace Carter ran through the narrow tunnels, his boots splashing through shallow pools of stagnant water. He carried a rusted datapad, its cracked screen flickering with old system logs. The air was thick with dampness, and the low hum of makeshift generators echoed through the underground settlement. He burst into the main chamber, a vast cavern lit by dim, flickering lights. Dozens of humans, men, women, and children, looked up as he entered. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes filled with the weariness of a people who had spent generations surviving on scraps. "Commander Hale," Jace gasped, pushing past a group of engineers working on a salvage water purifier. "You need to see this." Commander Ethan Hale stood at the center of the chamber, studying a holographic map of the region. He was an older man, his face lined with years of hardship. Once, he had been a soldier, fighting in the last days of the Human-Dominion War. Now he was a leader of ghosts. He looked up as Jace approached. "What is it?" Hale asked, his voice rough from years of breathing stale air. Jace handed him the datapad. "A signal. It came from the old battlefield. And it's not just static. Something turned on out there." The room fell silent. The battlefield was a place no one dared to go. It was haunted, not by ghosts, but by the wreckage of a war that had nearly erased their species. It was also a hunting ground for alien patrols, scavengers looking to strip the last pieces of human technology for their own empires. Hale studied the screen. The signal was weak but undeniable. A power surge had erupted from the northern quadrant of the ruins, sending a pulse across the entire system. "This can't be right," he muttered. "Nothing's been active up there for centuries." Jace's heart pounded. What if it's Titan's wrath? Murmurs spread through the chamber. The name alone was enough to send a ripple of excitement through the worn-out survivors. Titan's wrath was a legend, a myth passed down through the years. It was said to be the last of the human supercarriers, a warship so powerful that it could take on entire fleets by itself. Some claimed it had been destroyed in the final battle. Others believed it had been lost, buried under the wreckage of war. Hale exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Even if it is, what does that change? We're barely holding on as it is. If the aliens detect this, they'll send a fleet down here to wipe out whatever's left of us." Jace clenched his fists. "Or we take it first. If it's online, even a little, we might have a chance. If we can activate it, fully bring it back." "You think you can waltz into the middle of a Dominion-controlled battlefield and just flip a switch?" Hale interrupted. "Even if we find it, who's to say it's operational? It's been sitting there for centuries." Jace didn't back down. "And what if it is? What if this is our last shot? We live like rats down here, Commander. We hide, we scavenge, and we wait for the day they finally come to finish what they started. Titan's wrath was built for war. If it's still out there, it could turn the tide." The silence stretched between them. Hale looked around at the faces of the people he had sworn to protect. They had lived in fear for so long. If there was even a sliver of hope, could he ignore it? Finally, he let out a breath. "We can't risk sending too many. A small team. In and out." He looked Jace in the eyes. "You're leading it." Jace grinned. Wouldn't have it any other way. Within the hour, the team was assembled. 5 men and women, all trained scavengers, all survivors of countless close calls. They gathered their weapons, old but reliable, charged their power cells, and checked their breathing masks. The air above was toxic in places, laced with the remnants of old bioweapons. Jace tightened the straps on his gear as he stood at the entrance of the tunnel. The steel door groaned as it slid open, revealing the ruined world above. Cold wind whipped through the shattered buildings, carrying the distant sound of shifting metal. The battlefield stretched before them, littered with rusted wreckage and broken weapons. In the distance, the skeletal remains of fallen warships loomed like the bones of ancient giants. The team moved quickly, their footsteps careful on the unstable ground. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper of something unseen. The closer they got to the signal's source, the stronger the uneasy feeling grew. Jace's earpiece crackled. "We're close," one of his teammates whispered. "I don't like this." Neither did he. They reached a ridge overlooking a massive crater, and there it was. The Titan's wrath. Even in ruin, it was a monster. Half buried, its hull was cracked but not broken. Scorch marks covered its surface, and its massive cannons lay silent. Jace stared, barely able to breathe. It was real. Then his scanner beeped. Not from the ship, from the ruins around them. Jace's stomach dropped. We're not alone. Figures moved in the distance, tall, armored, weapons in hand. Alien patrols. And they were heading straight for the Titan's wrath. Jace's breath caught in his throat as he crouched behind a twisted metal beam, his eyes locked onto the approaching alien patrol. Their sleek armor gleamed under the faint light of the ruined battlefield, their movements precise and methodical. These weren't just scavengers. They were Dominion enforcers. If they were here, it meant the signal had been detected. And if the Dominion knew about Titan's wrath, humanity's last hope could be ripped away before they even had a chance to claim it. He turned to his team, keeping his voice low. "We don't have time. If they get to that ship first, it's over. We need to move. Now." His second-in-command, Riker, nodded, gripping his rifle. "And if they spot us?" Jace's jaw tightened. "Then we don't let them leave to report it." The team moved swiftly, staying low as they navigated the debris field. Every step had to be careful. One wrong move, and they'd alert the patrol. The Dominion soldiers were scanning the wreckage, their visor lights sweeping across the battlefield. Jace's heart pounded as he led the team toward the massive warship. It loomed before them, half buried, its hull a silent giant that had slept for centuries. They reached the outer hull and pressed themselves against the cold metal. Jace ran his gloved hand across the surface. The ship was ancient, but it was strong. He could feel it, as if the metal itself was waiting for something. A whisper crackled through his earpiece. "Jace, there's an access point about 30 meters to your left. Looks like an emergency hatch." Jace nodded. "We'll take it." They moved fast, keeping low as they reached the hatch. Riker pried open a control panel, revealing rusted wiring and a faded keypad. He pulled out a hacking tool, its small screen flickering as it interfaced with the ancient system. "Hurry," Jace urged, glancing back toward the patrol. They were getting too close. Riker gritted his teeth. Come on, come on." A soft beep. The hatch hissed open just as one of the alien soldiers turned their head. Jace didn't wait. Inside. Now. The team rushed in, sealing the hatch behind them. They held their breath, listening. Outside, the aliens paused, scanning the area. Jace could hear the faint hum of their equipment, the static of their comms. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, finally, the soldiers moved on. Jace exhaled and turned to face the darkness ahead. The inside of the ship was a tomb, silent, cold, and filled with the echoes of a past war. Dust floated in the dim emergency lighting, coating the walls in a thin layer. Wires hung from the ceiling, broken screens flickered weakly, and the air was stale with centuries of decay. But beneath it all, something was alive. A faint hum vibrated through the metal, the same low, pulsing energy that had drawn them here. Titan's wrath was not dead. Jace tapped his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. "We find the control room. If this thing still has power, we wake it up." They moved cautiously, their boots clanking against the metal floor. Old war banners, faded and torn, hung from the walls. The insignia of a forgotten fleet, the last of Earth's warriors. Jace felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a ship, it was a graveyard. They reached the main corridor, where a massive doorway stood sealed shut. Riker checked the console beside it. Locked. Looks like the system went into emergency shutdown a long time ago. Jace frowned. Can you override it? Riker shook his head. Not from here. We need to manually restart the main reactor. Jace sighed. Of course, it couldn't be easy. A voice crackled through their comms. Jace, I don't think we're alone in here. Jace's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Static. Then, a distant clang echoed through the corridors. The team froze. Another clang. Closer this time. Jace gripped his rifle. Weapons up. A shadow moved at the edge of their lights. Something shifted in the darkness, metal scraping against metal. The team slowly backed toward the control room door, their weapons aimed down the corridor. Then, a voice. It was distorted, hollow, and filled with static. Intruders detected. Jace's blood ran cold. From the shadows, a towering figure stepped forward. It was human-shaped but entirely mechanical. Its armor was ancient yet unbroken, its visor glowing with a dull red light. It raised its arm, and the ship rumbled in response. Jace barely had time to react before the floor beneath them shuddered. The lights flickered, and a deep guttural hum vibrated through the ship. Titan's wrath was waking up. The machine before them took another step, its voice crackling once more. State your designation. Jace swallowed hard. We're human. The machine tilted its head slightly. Silence stretched between them. Then, prove it. Jace hesitated. What did that mean? How did you prove you were human to a machine built in a war that ended centuries ago? Riker took a step forward. We're the last of humanity. We came to wake the ship. The machine's red visor flickered. Then, with a heavy, grinding motion, it stepped aside. The door to the control room unlocked. Jace exchanged a glance with his team. Whatever this thing was, it recognized them. They stepped inside. The control room was massive, a dome filled with ancient monitors and control panels. A massive holographic interface flickered to life in the center, displaying a blueprint of the ship. Jace could see it now. Titan's wrath was damaged, but not broken. The core was dormant, waiting. He placed his hand on the main console. A deep, ancient voice echoed through the room. Final command authorization required. Jace took a breath. He didn't know the codes, but he knew one thing. Humanity had never surrendered. He spoke the only command that mattered. Titan's wrath. Wake up. The ship roared. A surge of energy rushed through the walls, lighting up the corridors with a fiery red glow. The ship trembled, as if taking its first breath in centuries. Consoles flickered to life, engines rumbled in the depths below, and the power core ignited with a blinding pulse of energy. Outside, the alien patrol stopped in their tracks as the battlefield beneath them shook. Their scanners went wild. In the sky above, Dominion ships turned their sensors toward the planet. Titan's wrath had awakened, and the war was about to begin again. The ground trembled as Titan's wrath roared back to life. Energy pulsed through its ancient systems, long dormant engines flaring with new power. Lights flickered on across the massive warship, illuminating corridors that had been dark for centuries. The hum of awakening machinery filled the air, a sound that had not been heard since the final days of the war. Jace stood at the center of the control room, gripping the edge of the console as data flooded the screens before him. The ship's systems were rebooting, but they were incomplete. Damage reports flashed in red, entire sections of the ship were still offline, and the weapons systems were locked behind layers of security protocols. Riker was already at work, his fingers flying across a terminal. Shields are down, weapons offline. But the engines, they're coming back. This thing isn't dead yet. Jace barely had time to respond before his comm crackled with an urgent message from one of their scouts. Jace, we've got incoming. Jace's eyes snapped to the external sensors. The alien patrol had detected the activation. Dominion ships in orbit were moving, their sleek war vessels adjusting course toward the planet. The enemy knew. "Damn it," Jace muttered. "How long until they get here?" 5 minutes, the scout reported. Maybe less. They didn't have time. The ship was waking up, but it wasn't ready for battle. If the Dominion reached them before Titan's wrath was fully online, they would be slaughtered. Jace turned to his team. We need to hold them off until the ship is battle-ready. That means keeping them away from this control room at all costs. Riker cursed. We barely have enough firepower to fight off a patrol, let alone a full invasion. Jace clenched his jaw. Then we don't fight them head-on. We use the ship. It's still got defenses, even if they're not at full capacity. He slammed a command into the console, accessing whatever security systems were still operational. Automated turrets, shield emitters, and defense drones. Many were offline, but some were flickering to life. They just needed to buy time. Then the first explosion hit. The entire ship rocked as enemy forces landed near the outer hull. The Dominion wasn't waiting. They were coming fast, and they were coming hard. Jace grabbed his rifle. Let's move. The corridors of Titan's wrath became a battlefield. The first wave of alien soldiers breached the ship's entrance, their weapons glowing with lethal energy. Jace and his team took cover behind a wreckage, unleashing a hail of gunfire. The air filled with the sound of battle. Explosions, screaming alarms, and the relentless roar of energy weapons tearing through metal. A Dominion soldier charged forward, its sleek armor reflecting the red glow of the emergency lights. Jace fired 3 shots into its chest, but the creature barely flinched. Armor's too strong, Riker shouted. Go for the joints, Jace yelled back. His team adjusted their aim, targeting the weak points in the enemy's armor. The next burst of fire shattered the soldier's knee, sending it crashing to the ground before Jace finished it with a shot to the head. Another explosion rocked the ship as enemy forces pushed deeper. They were overwhelming in number, pouring in like a relentless tide. Jace knew they couldn't hold forever. Then the ship responded. Deep within the vessel, something stirred. A low rumble echoed through the corridors as automated defenses came online. Turrets hidden in the walls emerged, their barrels glowing red. With a deafening roar, they unleashed a storm of plasma fire, cutting through the enemy ranks. Jace ducked as return fire blasted past him. The ship's defenses were working, but it wasn't enough. The Dominion was adapting, using energy shields to block the turret fire as they advanced. Riker pulled up a data pad, scanning the ship's systems. We need to bring the main guns online. If we don't, they'll just keep coming. Jace nodded. Where's the primary control? Deep in the ship, near the reactor core. Jace cursed. Of course it is. They had no choice. If they wanted to survive, they had to get there. Fall back, Jace ordered. We're heading for the core. The team moved quickly, dodging enemy fire as they retreated deeper into the ship. The corridors shook with each impact as the Dominion forces kept pushing forward. Explosions sent debris flying, forcing them to weave through the chaos. The reactor chamber was massive, a cathedral of steel and energy. A colossal core pulsed at its center, glowing with raw power. This was the heart of Titan's wrath. If they could bring it to full capacity, the ship would regain its full combat abilities. Riker sprinted to the control panel. I'm activating the power surge. This will either wake up the ship or blow us all to hell. Jace reloaded his weapon. Then let's hope it's the first one. Riker slammed his palm against the activation pad. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a deafening roar filled the ship. The reactor blazed with renewed energy, sending power surging through every system. The lights burned brighter, and a deep vibration rattled through the hull. Titan's wrath was fully awake. On the outer hull, massive gun turrets emerged from their long-dormant stations. They rotated, targeting the Dominion ships in the sky. With a thunderous boom, they fired. The first enemy cruiser exploded in a brilliant fireball, debris scattering in all directions. The Dominion fleet, once confident in their victory, now scrambled to react. Jace grinned. Now we fight. The ship's automated defenses activated in full force. Swarms of drones launched from hidden compartments, engaging the enemy soldiers still inside. The turrets fired relentlessly, pushing back the invaders. The Dominion forces realized their mistake too late. Titan's wrath was not a relic. It was a monster. Jace and his team fought their way back to the main deck, gunning down the remaining enemies. The ship's systems were running at full capacity now, its engines roaring as it prepared to take off. Through the shattered viewport, Jace saw the Dominion fleet still hovering in orbit, hesitant. He smirked. Let's give them a reason to run. He pressed a final command. The ship's main cannon charged, energy building to a critical point. Outside, the Dominion flagship turned to flee. Too late. A massive beam of pure destruction erupted from Titan's wrath, slicing through the flagship like a blade through paper. The enemy ship detonated in a massive explosion, sending shockwaves across the sky. The remaining Dominion forces panicked. Their invincible fleet was no longer invincible. They scrambled to retreat, their once overwhelming presence now reduced to desperation. Jace watched as the enemy fled. He exhaled, gripping the console as Titan's wrath settled. The battle was over. For now. Riker let out a laugh. We actually did it. Jace nodded, but his eyes remained on the screen. The Dominion would be back. Stronger, angrier. But now, humanity had a weapon of its own. Titan's wrath had returned, and the war was far from over. The ship trembled, no longer from enemy fire, but from something far more powerful. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Lights flickered, not in desperation, but in resurgence. Titan's wrath was no longer a graveyard of forgotten war. It was waking up. Jace stood at the command console, his breath heavy, his heart pounding. The old warship had been silent for centuries, a relic of humanity's past glories, but now it pulsed with life once more. Screens that once displayed error messages now filled with tactical readouts, power levels rising exponentially. The ship wasn't just functional, it was furious. Riker's hands flew over the controls, his eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know how, but the ship, it's not just rebooting. It's remembering. Jace frowned. What do you mean remembering? Riker tapped a flashing screen. This ship wasn't just built for war. It learned from it. Titan's wrath was humanity's last stand back then, but it was also their greatest weapon. It studied every battle, adapted, improved itself. That means the ship rumbled violently as its full might came online. It's about to show us what it can really do. A deep mechanical voice resonated through the bridge, artificial but ancient, as if waking from a deep slumber. Titan's wrath, fully operational, awaiting command. Jace and his team exchanged glances. The ship had spoken. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was aware. Before anyone could process what that meant, the external sensors blared with new warnings. The Dominion fleet was regrouping in orbit. The explosion of their flagship had shocked them, but not broken them. More ships, larger and deadlier, were emerging from slip space. The Dominion was done playing games. Jace clenched his fists. They're coming back, and they're bringing everything they've got. Riker grinned. Good. Let's give them a real fight. Jace took a deep breath and turned toward the console. The ship had power now. Weapons, shields, engines, everything was at full capacity. But could they really take on an entire Dominion armada? Titan's wrath answered for him. Tactical advantage calculated. Enemy forces, overwhelming. Recommended strategy, superior firepower. Jace smirked. Now we're talking. The ship rumbled as massive turrets locked into place. Missile bays opened, energy cannons charged, and thousands of defense drones hummed to life, their sleek forms gliding through the corridors like ghosts of a bygone war. The hangar doors split apart, revealing squadrons of unmanned fighters, their sleek black frames reflecting the eerie blue glow of the ship's systems. Then, with a mighty roar, the engines ignited. Titan's wrath lifted from the planet's surface, dust and debris swirling into a storm beneath it. The ancient warship, once a monument to a lost battle, now ascended like an avenging god. The ground trembled, cracks forming in the rock as the sheer power of its takeoff shattered the landscape. The sky darkened as the massive vessel climbed higher, breaking free of the atmosphere, emerging into the cold, endless void of space. The Dominion fleet was waiting. Sleek, silver warships adjusted their formations, weapons locking onto the rising Titan. Their confidence had returned. One ship, no matter how powerful, could not defeat an entire armada. But they didn't understand. This wasn't just a ship. This was the last weapon of a species that refused to die. The enemy opened fire first. Hundreds of energy lances surged forward, bright streaks of destruction tearing through space toward Titan's wrath. The ship responded. A shimmering energy barrier flared to life around the hull, absorbing the brunt of the assault. The Dominion fire barely made a dent before the ship retaliated. Jace slammed his fist down on the command console. Return fire. All weapons. Titan's wrath unleashed hell. Its main cannons erupted, twin beams of pure energy slicing through the void. The nearest Dominion ship didn't have time to evade. The beam struck its core, and a moment later, it detonated in a massive explosion. Debris scattered in all directions as the shockwave rippled through the fleet. Missiles launched in rapid succession, weaving through the enemy formation like guided spears. Fighters screamed through the battlefield. AI-controlled ships moving with terrifying precision, tearing apart Dominion interceptors with ruthless efficiency. The enemy scrambled to react. More ships maneuvered into position, firing relentlessly, but Titan's wrath kept pushing forward, shields absorbing the blows, weapons firing in synchronized fury. The ship wasn't just attacking, it was dominating. Then the Dominion brought out their trump card. A colossal warship, larger than any other, emerged from the void. Its hull was adorned with glowing red symbols, pulsating like a heartbeat. This was no ordinary ship. This was a dreadnought, a command vessel built to subjugate entire planets. Jace's breath hitched. That thing's big. Riker nodded grimly. And I'm guessing it's not here to surrender. The Dominion dreadnought charged its primary weapon. A massive energy cannon along its spine began to glow, power building for a shot that could rip Titan's wrath in half. Jace made a decision. Target that cannon. Fire everything we've got. The warship obeyed. Every turret, every missile bay, every drone redirected its fire toward the dreadnought. The space between them became a storm of destruction, energy beams colliding in brilliant flashes, missiles streaking through the darkness. But the dreadnought was powerful. Its shields held firm, and its weapon continued to charge. Jace gritted his teeth. We need more firepower. Then Titan's wrath did something unexpected. The ship's energy readings spiked. Systems that had remained dormant until now roared to life. The ship was adapting, just as Riker had said. It had been built to learn, to evolve. And now it had found a solution. A new weapon deployed. A massive railgun, unseen until now, extended from the underbelly of the ship. Glowing with an ominous red light, it locked onto the dreadnought. The ship's AI spoke once more. Enemy dreadnought classified as primary threat. Deploying experimental weapon. Hellfire Lance. Jace barely had time to react before the weapon fired. A single shot. It cut through space like a blade through flesh. The Dominion dreadnought, the pride of their fleet, didn't just explode, it was erased. The shot punched through its hull, and in the blink of an eye, the massive warship split in half, its core overloading. A blinding explosion consumed the remains, shockwaves tearing through the Dominion fleet. The remaining enemy ships hesitated. Their most powerful warship was gone. Their fleet was shattered. And before them, Titan's wrath loomed, unharmed, its weapons still glowing, daring them to continue the fight. They ran. One by one, Dominion ships turned and fled, vanishing into slip space, abandoning the battlefield. They had come to crush a dying species. Instead, they had awoken something far worse. Jace let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The battle was over. They had won. But as he looked at the controls, at the ship's glowing interface, he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The battlefield was silent now, but Jace knew it wouldn't last. The Dominion had retreated, but not because they had given up. No empire that vast, that ruthless, would allow such a humiliation to go unanswered. They would return, stronger and angrier than before. Titan's wrath floated among the wreckage, its massive frame casting a shadow over the debris of the shattered Dominion fleet. The ancient warship had proven its power, but Jace knew this was just one battle. The real war was still ahead. Riker let out a long breath, watching the enemy remnants vanish into the void. "They're running," he said, his voice carrying a mix of relief and disbelief. "We actually did it." Jace stared at the console, the ship's glowing interface reflecting in his eyes. "For now," he muttered. The AI's voice echoed through the bridge. "Enemy presence. Minimal. Probability of immediate counterattack. Low. Strategic recommendation. Press the advantage." Jace turned toward Riker and the rest of the crew. "The AI is right. If we let them regroup, we might not survive the next wave. We need to take the fight to them." A moment of silence followed. Then, slowly, nods of agreement. These were the last warriors of humanity. And now, for the first time in centuries, they had a weapon capable of fighting back. Riker grinned. "So, where do we start?" Titan's wrath already had the answer. A holo display lit up in front of them, revealing a map of Dominion-controlled space. One system pulsed in red, the Dominion stronghold responsible for Earth's downfall centuries ago. It was a fortress world, heavily guarded, but its destruction would send a message across the stars. Jace's jaw tightened. "We start by taking back what's ours." The ship's engines roared as they locked in their course. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about survival. About proving that humanity wasn't finished yet. Within minutes, the massive warship activated its slip space drive, vanishing into the void, heading straight for the heart of the enemy. The final battle was coming. And this time, humanity was on the attack.